What's the plan, Tesla? Welcome back.
CyberSpace
Podcast. Empirical traders. Do you know what I mean? So like empirical traders.
Welcome back to the CyberSpace podcast.
Empirical traders.
Yeah, actually, I like that. Right, sweet.
Hello and welcome back to the CyberSpace podcast. It's another episode with your normal host, Josh. I'm one of the empirical trainers. We are behind this podcast and we deliver cybersecurity knowledge to people wherever they may be, whether they're trying to get into their first cybersecurity role, whether they're trying to advance their cybersecurity career, or whether they just want to understand a little bit more about the day-to-day goings on. I want to be a bit safer online. I want to know what people are doing with my data. I want to be a bit more private. We've got stuff for you up there. So find us on socials, TikTok, Instagram. We have communities on Discord as well as a school. School is the best place to access us, as well as see some of the content that we're releasing that is less short form, more long form, more targeted at actually advancing your knowledge and in maybe a more professional stance as well, so you can do better at getting a job or doing your current job. So that's enough about empirical training. I want to focus on the start of today's podcast, as he was the start of last week's podcast, Dr. James Stanger. So James has joined us. He's an acute evangelist for CompTIA, who do a fantastic variety of entry-level and more advanced level cybersecurity, as well as other tech certifications. Big name. We always advocate that people use those to kind of knock down the first few doors of the hiring process, because it will really show that you have a great level of knowledge, and then they just want to know to get who to know you as a person, which we covered a lot in episode 1. If you didn't check that out yet, go check it out. Some great tips of how to actually stand out from the crowd when you get to that interview stage and demonstrate your passion and hunger for learning, which is really what organizations are looking for, those softer skills which you can't really get in a certification, maybe not at the moment anyway. So thank you very much, James. This episode, we're going to find out more about James, and we're going to look into some of the topics about AI and the future of cybersecurity analysts. Will we still have a job in the future? Will it be all be taken away by AI analysts? How can I future-proof myself so that I'm going to be relevant and valid in cybersecurity, as well as people who want to get into? We want to explore, is it still something that's worth getting into with AI on the horizon? Find out all in this episode of the CyberSpace podcast. We're back here with James Stanger, who is going to gratefully join us for a second episode to really dive into some more of the issues. We really started running away with the cybersecurity conversations there about how to get a job, but also all of the kind of cruxes of what the problem is, what the problem is for hiring managers, for organizations, the technological problem, which AI we glanced over the surface of, and we really could have spent an entire episode in there.
Yeah.
But James, I want to pull this back if we can and just ask a little bit about your background, because I listed your achievements at the beginning, and sorry to embarrass you, but we'd love to just hear a little bit about your background, your journey to where you currently are today.
Sure, man. I've always loved tech. And probably in at least at the beginning, kind of a destructive way. My parents would walk in and their very expensive stereo would be in pieces. I was just a little kid and I just was fascinated. And so I stole a screwdriver and I just kind of went to town. So I just loved how tech worked. I suppose from after a while, what I did is I got the idea for some reason that I wanted to go get a doctorate in English. I refer to that as my doctorate in unemployment. But even when I was doing that research, I did a research on on a UK person named William Blake, and he was a very technologically oriented person. It's like, well, how can a poet be that? Well, actually, he was an artist, and he invented whole methods of printing. You could argue that he created kind of the first web pages in some ways. Anyway, but and part of my dissertation was about that sort of thing. But
that's piqued my
while
interest.
I was getting my doctorate, it's interesting. It's interesting stuff, but it was a total waste of time, financially. My gosh, But anyway, during that time, I needed to do something to work for a living, right? To earn the money and everything with, for the kids and all that. So I started working at, this is in the University of California, Riverside, started working at something called the English Short Title Catalog. And it basically was taking some of these the old books up until 1804 and putting them online. So old books that were created during the hand press period. You know what I mean by hand press? You know, they're not
Yeah.
a printing press, but a hand press, up until 1804, right around there. And these were titles that were in, you know, old books and very, very have been studied for years, major resource. And we wanted to put that online. This is 1990. I got that job in 1991, 1992. So I was working on databases, bringing analog things into cyber, right, into the internet. I was working on databases on the internet in 1992. That's pretty early,
Yeah.
right? I mean, you know, Windows 95 showed up, and that's when people started using their modems or what have you. So I was interested in that. I got introduced into we were using SGML, which is, you know, what HTML kind of came from, and all that. So over the years, as HTML came about and the web came about, I was primed for that because I'd already, you know, been using code and already been doing that. And so by the time I finished the PhD, and I'd already gotten a job as a technical editor, and then started doing things like firewall, back then firewall programming and all that sort of thing. Over the years, and then as a technical editor, I started doing two things. One, getting very deep into tech. And so I would go and literally wait outside the server room, and somebody would walk by, and then I'd start asking her questions or him questions. And the other thing I started doing is I started hanging around what we jokingly called Mahogany Row, and that, in other words, where the C-level people were, because it just interested me, not only the technical side, but how businesses worked.
Mm-hmm.
So I did a lot of research in there and tying that together. So as my professional development, I basically focused on not only writing that stuff, but doing that stuff from a technical level, and then doing the business of it. So I've been a president of an organization that did web development training. I've done a lot of consulting work as a security analyst. And so the biggest thing is curiosity. I think that has been a hallmark of any sort of progress if I've ever made in my career. Is I remember one time I had a professor, and then at the same time a business person, basically saying the same thing. It's like, James, you're never worry about asking dumb questions, do you? You know, because you got to get to the root of things. You know, and sometimes that might make you look silly at first, but after a while, if you get the right foundation, that's critical. And I think it's got to be about foundations, Josh. You know, on some level.
If you're
Curiosity is one of those.
If you're not building on a solid foundation, then it's, you know, it's worse. This thinks there's a Bible parable, isn't there? The hand house that's built on sand. And
I think that's part of it. Yeah.
Asking those stupid questions. Like they say, there's no stupid questions, only stupid answers. But it does require a level of confidence to actually go out and say that. And too many people who I've worked with feign knowing something. You ask them about, do you know about this? And they'll say, they'll rattle off a few things they do know. They'll try and bamboozle you slightly. And if you don't know enough, sometimes that'll work, and you won't be able to say, actually, hang on, you don't really understand that, do you? It doesn't really serve anyone. Maybe it serves you in the moment, but you haven't learned anything from that exchange. So I think that's a huge quality to call out there.
It's a great point. There's people I've worked with before who you can tell after the third hour that they're talking nonstop. You're like, oh wow, they're compensating for something. But anyway, as far as foundations, Josh, you know, the technical foundations, I think there are a lot of folks, aren't there? Have you ever noticed they want to stampede, that's the word I'll use, into something, you know, because they see it as high paying, you know, whether it be, I'm going to learn about the cloud, or I'm going to learn about AWS, or cybersecurity.
At the moment.
What was that?
People, yeah.
And what they do is they forget that they have to learn about what a MAC address is, what the TCP handshake is, you know, those foundations. If you don't,
I mean, it's difficult because you often get the question. I think we're going to talk later on about network fundamentals and needing to kind of establish that before you can start studying cybersecurity, because it's something that CompTIA lay out very well. It is boring though. You want to. I found it really difficult to learn the foundations of networking because I came from a background. I studied law, and I actually, similar to you, I did do a doctorate, which I'm really interested. I assumed that was just something technological, really interesting. It was English, but I did a master's in ancient history, which I call one for me, one for myself. My student loan doesn't thank me. It was really a waste of money, but I enjoyed it.
Oh yeah, it was for me. I'm not saying it was for you, but it didn't work out for me at all. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's challenging. I hear you. I think the reality for me, and it might be for the people as well, to keep myself interested. I did these things in tandem. I couldn't just learn networking. I would have to learn some about cybersecurity, then realize I have a gap here. I don't really understand what they mean about MAC addresses or dynamic host resolution and those type of pieces. Then you dive into the networking. For me, that was a much more sustainable way of doing it.
No, that's a good point. First of all, you've got to juggle things. I think a lot of people, when they're looking to transition from one career to another, that juggling factor, or keeping the plate spinning, whether it be family life, social life,
Absolutely.
but the current gig, the new thing I'm transitioning to, and trying to figure out how all that works is definitely a factor.
So James, where are we at now? When we've got you've been the technical editor, you're starting to dive into learning more about business and as well as security. The 90s tech security problems, maybe give us a brief overview of how they were compared to the present day. Because I know there are commonalities, but you might look fondly.
There are. One of the things I learned in the 1990s is the idea, if you have the same systems repeated over and over again, right, that's a problem. Back in the 80s, there was something called the Robert Morris Internet Worm. In the 90s and 2000s, you had a lot of viruses and worms and things. Moving a little bit more modern into the 2000s, you had Stuxnet. Now you have things like ransomware, zero-day attacks. They are all various forms of the idea of kind of what happened with COVID. You have a naive population of entities, whether they be human beings or computers, that are all the same, right? And then one vector can affect all of them and spread, right?
That is such a great example.
That's a reality. Yeah.
Yeah.
Was that?
I just really enjoyed that example of comparing it to COVID, being too connected, too intermingling, and not taking precaution.
Yes. Yeah. That's the thing. And then you have, so of course we have signature-based approaches, antivirus that has, that solves some of those problems and things. But what you have also that I think is a consistent thing, whether it be from the 90s to 2024 and beyond, are kind of businesses that assume the tech will take care of itself on some level, or we solved yesterday's battle. We have signature-based intrusion detection, or we have firewalls, or we have all that, and then they don't realize that those yesterday's victories really don't solve today's problems.
Yeah.
So, for example, if you have all those same systems, can't you introduce some sort of tech, and which we can, that can make them different enough to where something even AI enabled can't spread as easily. And people will say, well, James, that's why God gave us updates. Update the software. How lazy are these people that they don't update the software, that it becomes ransomware or something like that. And it's like, I'll give you an example. It's a friend of mine in the state of Washington. There's another person I know who works for the Center for Disease Control in Europe. They had to do a simple Java upgrade, upgrade of the Java stack, that runs a lot of their
not all the pop-ups you get on your personal machine, but actually the back-end stuff. Because everyone's
the back end. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, upgrade Java Flash Player.
Yeah. Oh my. But the heavy-duty Java stuff that's in the on the back end, and it took about 18 months for both of them to do these updates. One of them had about 40,000 endpoints and systems to upgrade. Another one had fewer than that. And you're like, well, that's because they don't have enough talented individuals to do it. Maybe not really. Were they not skilled enough, or could they not buy remote software that could just automatically push those updates on? Updates are a business thing more than they are a technical thing. And the reason why it took them so long is that we all know that developers create a lot of custom code for a government or for a manufacturer or whatever vertical, finance, whatever. They create a lot of custom code. And if you update the software, the underlying software underneath it improperly, guess what? It breaks that code.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so the reason why it takes so long
is the term.
See, the technical debt side of things. Those are, and there are reasons why this technical debt, which is basically where you like skip steps along the way. And we'll get to that later. Just like the same way we do with our Visa cards, we'll pay it later. Right? It adds up and it causes problems. These are the common issues, and those things in some ways haven't changed in a lot of organizations, I'll say.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So yeah,
and that can be a problem.
Yeah, I think that's spot, because the one that I always hear, forgive me, I wasn't doing security in the 90s, but is that patching. Patching is still the most common thing that we've had.
Not many people were.
Yeah, yeah, it was true then, and it's still true now that people don't patch their systems well enough, and for all those reasons, we still burden ourselves with so much technical debt. There's always this fantastic meme that came to mind where the head dev is off, and so the like kind of senior dev takes over, and he just cracks his knuckles and say, "Today we're sorting technical debt," and and they kind of go crazy for it because the business doesn't recognize it, right? It doesn't drive PR statements, it doesn't drive kind of headlines, and we want to be moving forward. But
iteration is so important, and organizations have a heck of a time with iteration to go back and solve problems, because I'm trying to move ahead, right? Why are you not being progressive? It's like, well, because I'm dealing with decisions that were made 5 years ago that I'm fixing, and now suddenly that can be the issue.
Yeah. So speaking of progression, little segue there. How did you progress from your technical editor job into being more focused maybe on the kind of technical side, and later on your kind of educational side as well?
So what I did as a technical editor, I realized that there were two types of technical editors. There were those that kind of go back and kind of retreat into, oh, I'm really good at grammar, or I'm a really good writer, whatever that means. And then the people who are like, well, I need to understand the tech better so that I can express myself. And I'm the latter school. I needed to really understand what I was learning about. So what I did is that as I was given a course, it was a course in JavaScript back in the day. And so I learned JavaScript. And then I was given a course, a friend of mine who I still know to this day works for Google. I should have followed him in his career. They realized that this was we were a startup, and I was technical editor. And they said, James, you're the ideal person for this. We need to take this guy who has several courses in his head, and we have a week and a half to create these courses. And so I started, I think it was on a Wednesday. He flew in from Michigan, and by a week later, we had these courses done. And and it was just fascinating to see the history that this person had, and to kind of be a sponge and to take all of that and encapsulate it. And that, he started telling me about all the different applications that were out there, the different intrusion detection systems and all that. And it was just insatiable for me. It just kind of made me very curious about how all this stuff works. So that's when I made the transition. I went and got back then an MCSE, and just was very interested in the security side. The Linux side was very important for two reasons. One, back then you used Linux systems to break into things as a pen tester, and which was always fun to do. But then after a while, Linux became the foundational service for things like DNS. And that's another foundational tool that everybody should learn about. DNS is a huge thing, whether you're an attacker or a defender or what have you. So that's why I made the transition. I had to learn this stuff. And so after a while, I even started writing less or writing fewer courses and things, and was doing more technical side. People would call me up and say, James, I'm having a problem with a SYN flood, attack, I think. And sometimes it was, a lot of times they just didn't configure their network right.
Okay. Yeah. So that's how you kind of made that transition into the consultancy piece as well. It's interesting that I didn't realize that they're kind of creating courses and educational pieces come so early for you, but it almost sounded like you that kind of conduit for the information in this very gifted person's head, or very knowledgeable person's head.
Oh my God.
It's something that I found as I move into the softer side of security. I do a lot of working with product teams, and I create some kind of public facing material. Having had the experience I had as someone who likes tech and also security analyst, I can actually communicate what is in their head outwards in a way that is useful. But it's them; they're the real, they're the real story and I'm just shaping it in a way. And also, I found that having somebody who they trust to tell that story is really important, because there's a lot of people out there who can write marketing or whatever pieces who just kind of misconstrue or want to present it in the best possible way. without really acknowledging the idiosyncrasies, the accuracies that is important within tech, because I have never met people other than people in tech who care more about accuracy. If you say this, it might imply something else. We can't possibly have that. That is always, the accuracy is so important in cybersecurity.
It is. It is. And, it's interesting because I think one of the big things that I noticed was when I first started writing things, I got real technical and then I got back into writing for people. I would focus on how the technical things work. And I wanted to really bring it in so that anybody on whatever level, business level, casual level, very technical level, could understand it and want to read it. And what I realized, it was a person who said, James, this is very technically accurate, but I don't see why this is important to me. And I'm like, okay, so I missed the mark.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize the so what. There's the what and there's the so what, right? Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I will really focus on is the so what factor. This is important to you because. And as a pen tester, I was hired to write up, executive reports. And right away, they're like, James, don't even bother with the technical stuff. You need to talk about why this is important from a risk perspective. And that's when I learned, that IT people don't understand what business risk is. They understand the technical side of things very well, and the technical risk. Business folks, for a long time, it's gone away over the years, in some cases, or it's gotten more subtle. A lot of people almost have a contempt for tech. You know what I mean? Well, that's vocational. And this is old school talking, but there's a lot of people in the business world, for whatever reason, either because they're intimidated by it or they see it as just, well, that's just detail. That's detail that they'll take care of. You can't do that anymore.
Yeah. They don't bother themselves with the finer details.
Yeah. You have to be tech tolerant as a leader. And I think that's something that a lot of people, and you take a look at whatever, hack you've seen or whatever problem with software or whatever that you see. It has to do a lot with leadership that has not traditionally been tech tolerant. And there has been an acceptance of that attitude. And it's not a good attitude. It doesn't help. And so as I made that transition, I always made sure to focus on getting hands-on and practical with the tech. And I love geeking out, but then I also have to be very ready to take a few steps up to what I call levels, 8 and 9 of the OSIRM. The OSIRM, 7-layer model.
Yeah, I've heard of 8.
About,
8's the person, right? What's 9?
8's the person, I think, and then 9 is the entity, right? And I would even argue 10 is like the information, and 11 is like identity. Now, it's more than just the personal; it's the identity management. And folks, obviously those aren't official layers, but if you don't have those additional layers ready for your stack, then you don't have the right foundation, and you're not going to be able to really make a transition. And to me, if someone has been successful, if I've been successful in any way, it's the ability to transition and morph over time into various environments. Because I've worked in tech environment, worked in startup environments, established business, in the finance sector, in the education sector, nonprofit sector. You have to be able to morph. And if you have that right foundation, you can keep your feet. AstraZeneca, that company, you've heard of it? Big, huge,
jabs.
Pharmaceutical company. They like to see themselves as a tech company that happens to do pharmaceutical, or maybe a data company that happens to do pharmaceutical, because there's a guy named Bob Vanier, Robert Vanier. He is their head of cloud and data center. And he said this to me a while back. He said, his teams have noticed that the tech they work with changes really quite radically about every 3 weeks. So when they go up to AWS or Azure or whatever tool they're using, it has changed so radically. It's like, that used to be 18 months, or it used to be a longer period of time. And I'm like, well, how do they cope with that? And he said, well, if they have the right foundations and things, from DNS to all that, then they can keep their feet pretty well. And I took that to heart. I was like, that was an interesting comment. I wish I had thought of it.
Yeah, well, I think you raised some really great points there. I like the term tech tolerant. I thought that was a really great way to summarize what is probably quite a complex idea because people they don't want to ignore it. The tolerance is probably a great way to summarize it. And
Yeah,
just a
yeah,
point that you talk about morphing, you talk about evolving, we talked about wanting to have the ability to break things, understand them, and learn. Cybersecurity, if you're thinking of a career in cybersecurity and you've got your eyes on that high salary that gets touted and you want to get to a point where you can sit down comfortably and just chill and stay static. That's not how it works. This is not for you, right? You have to move forward because obviously, often cybersecurity professionals, regardless of what level you're at, you're in some way driving forward the tech tolerance or the security
yes.
strategy of these entities and organizations. So that's a really, really valid point. I summed up really nicely. But I want to go back to something you said earlier, and then you kind of said it at the end,
Sure.
right? When we used the OSI
Mhm.
model, you create those extra levels, and you're very
Yeah,
clear that there are 7 levels of the OSI model, but there's also you could use the other ones to explain bigger concepts. How do you find
sure.
that balance of what is technically accurate and then focusing also on the kind of so what the thing I often remind when I was in school ages ago, you do science lessons, right? They tell you that light is a wave. You then get to
Right.
maybe high school A level, they tell you that light is a particle, and we kept that from you because it was too complicated back then. But here's how it actually works. I'm sure if you go into college university levels,
Oh
there's more
gosh.
stuff we didn't know
Yeah.
about. So, how do you balance that kind of need to set a good foundation, teach a principle, boil it down to its fundamentals, while also kind of being aware of nuance and maybe not setting up people to have logical fallacies when it comes to the concepts you're trying to convey? Big question.
There's no. No, there's nothing more effective than getting to know the technology at a deep level, and 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 that means that the deeper you really understand a technology, you're not just geeking out about it in isolation. You're saying, well, how does this apply to the overall business? So you remain hands-on and very practical about it, but and that means that you're like, well, once this gets into a live environment, how is it going to behave? And when I say it, I mean whether it be open source piece of software. How are you going to use Wireshark in a real environment? How can
Mm.
I identify a job role and a specific job role? And the cybersecurity job roles have morphed, and continue to morph in really interesting ways. How can you take that piece of software like Wireshark and how does it apply to an incident responder, for example? Might not. How does it apply to a pen tester or a security analyst? If you're a cloud security engineer, what piece of software, maps to that business goal? And if you take a look at whether it be the ANISA cybersecurity ECSF cybersecurity framework. ANISA is an organization based in Europe. They're basically putting together, what they feel are a lot of the key job roles in cybersecurity and IT. Or in the United States, there's the NICE initiative, NIST, NICE. I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
Yeah.
NICE. Just Google it, and you'll see all the key skills, right, that they put together, and various job roles. If you go to CompTIA, you can take a look at how we implement ECSF, how we implement NIST on basic job role. I shouldn't say basic, but really critical in demand job roles. And if you take the technology and then think, well, how's that applied to a particular, activity in a job role? I think that's how you keep that balance.
Mm. Interesting. Yeah, it's something I struggle with on a
Yeah.
regular basis. You want to get the pieces in. You want to explain it simply. Sometimes I come back to an example I've given and which I thought was great at the time. I'm like, maybe I was a bit oversimplified it here, and now I've got to explain a core topic on top of that and almost break down maybe some false expectations that I'd set. Um, there's a good call
Also,
outs there. More, yeah, go on.
well, get a mentor as well, or at least network with people and communicate with them and talk with it. What I found one time, I brought in a friend of mine to a conference at CompTIA, and the IT, the CIO came up and said, "Hey, I need to talk to you for a second." And the three of us chatted specifically about risk management and incident response. And the CIO, I was fascinated. I was just a fly on the wall looking at these two folks talking to each other. And I remember when at the end of the conversation, the CIO said, this 15 minutes just saved me about 3 months of stumbling around. Thank you.
Yeah.
To me, another thing is finding a way, whether you call it mentor or whether it be a peer network, so you can bounce ideas off of. So learn
Yeah.
how to bounce ideas off of people. That's really critical.
Yes. There's a safe space to ask the stupid questions, and they are, no matter how
Ooh, I like
advanced you are
that.
in your career, you're
Yeah,
gonna have stupid
yeah.
questions. We actually, side note, when we called this podcast called the CyberSpace, and initially we toyed with the idea of cyberspace, a safe space to discuss cybersecurity issues. We decided it was a little
Oh,
bit
I
too
like that.
soft.
No, it's good. We need more of those all of the time, because it allows us an intellectual play space, or a physical play space, as it were, or an interpersonal play space. So I like that, or a safe space, you can call it. You mentioned something earlier. We were talking about uh, the different job roles or whatever. I think one thing that is important to realize is how adjacent the concept of adjacency has been on my mind lately. In other words, the things that are next to us. What we want to do, let me see if I can put this in a good way. We have a tendency to say, well, we want to get into cybersecurity, when really, maybe your first cybersecurity job is a help desk job, or
Yeah.
maybe your first I'm being a little facetious there, but you have to start somewhere. And that starting point can be as an email administrator, or as a tech support professional, or whatever. There are a lot of different ways in which you can start, and then you work your way into cybersecurity. I think people, and when I talked about adjacency, well, what jobs are adjacent to
Mhm.
cybersecurity jobs? And I think that's a really important thing to start
De-
thinking about this.
Definitely, yeah. I think you want to dive straight into there, but obviously there's a lot of foundational pieces you can pick up. If you are on the IT side, those are,
Yeah.
if you're in security, you're going to be working with IT to actually get them to help you respond to incidents, take actions, take hosts offline, or whatever it might be. So having come from that background, being part of that, you've putting your hand up and saying, "Hey, I want to work with the security team. I want to do some tabletop stuff or some playbooks with them and
Yeah.
understand more
Yeah.
about it." Expose yourself. Yeah, that's what we talk about. Kind of carving out roles for yourself is volunteer
Mhm.
for that, because no one's going to say, "Hey, no, we don't want you to." Oh, they're grateful you're taking an interest in cybersecurity. So there's a lot of opportunity there. Another thing that triggered in my mind, CompTIA, which we're definitely going to talk about a bit more. But there was a CompTIA material source I've seen where you do the kind of a career pathway with a different. So there's a few
Yeah.
careers. I think one's DevOps, cloud engineer,
You
security,
bet.
and there's a bunch of courses, not just your own, but other ones out there that can help you kind of move along level 1, 2, and 3. And when I saw
Mhm.
that, I really thought about adjacency resonated with me, because we often look at them in linear, and it's easy to make a map. It's much simpler to do it linearly, but you can also have tangents off these as well. Security has really valuable uh, connotations into other roles as well. If you become a cloud engineer and you've come from a security background, wow, you're going to save that company a lot of headaches down the line by doing DevSecOps processes from the beginning. Even softer roles. You look at myself. I went into solutions engineering, so kind of on the sales side for a short period. Didn't enjoy it, but it was a great opportunity, which I never thought I'd have for my security in world. So be
Oh,
prepared
that's
for those type of opportunities. Yeah,
No, I love that. I love what you mentioned about you know technical sales, right? That, and I've seen people that be their first, in a sense, the on their pathway to a cybersecurity job. It's a great way to get things started. That's very common. Technical editor. That's I suppose that was the kind of that role that allowed me to get to where I was am as a consultant, for example. But you mentioned pathway. I think that's so important. Something happened about 10 years ago. I was reading about seasoned IT professionals and what their perspective was about education. Did they like certification or hate certification, or did they like training, or what was important, right? And what I noticed, the thing that really resonated for me was the vast majority of them. It was like 50 something percent. And it's like, well, what do you mean majority, James? That's only a little over 50, but that's actually a huge percentage. All went, I'm not even quite sure what my next step for education would be. Now think about that, Josh. To me, that's interesting. It's like,
Mhm.
if you're an experienced person, you'd go, well, I've been working on this type of projects lately, so here's the skill that I need to pick up.
Yeah,
Here's the unknown skill that I know I need to learn, right?
Yeah.
And yet they had a hard time with that. And that's why then I started I started really pushing for the idea. And I think a lot of other people at CompTIA were as well, that we've got to put together this idea of adjacency or pathways so that we can authoritatively say, here's one way you can do it. There are many others, but at least you have to develop your own pathway. And I know that's such a common, it seems like a concept that's pretty easy, but I didn't see a whole lot of other organizations talking about that idea of a learning pathway
Yeah.
and
It,
how one thing can lead to another in very creative and interesting ways.
Yeah, if I'm being honest, it's one of the only resources I've regularly used from yourselves, because I thought it was a great way to frame a discussion. We've done kind of pathway discussions with our community members, saying, okay, where do you want to get to? Like, where's the end goal destination, and then trying to work backwards from that. And that's a great resource I use, because you're pointing out. To talk about the CompTIA certifications, it's something we always recommend. We ascertain what level they are at as to whether they need to start with the fundamentals, do like the Network Plus, or whether they can jump straight into the Cybersecurity Analyst Plus pieces. I know you have a few others as well.
Sure.
It's something that I think is really valuable, because it does two things. It teaches you good stuff. Right? I actually took it years ago when I was a security analyst. I'll come clean, James. I failed, but that was partly because
yeah. I did too. First time. Yeah.
Yeah, and I didn't take it a second time.
I did that work. Yeah.
I felt like I felt actually the work had been what was the real value to me. That I'd learnt the pieces for it, and I kind of it was a multi choice exam back then. I know you've really evolved them now to include more lab stuff, which I think is a better way of evaluating people.
Performance-based,
It was the process of learning for me was what was important there, to get the skills and improve myself. But I was already in a cybersecurity analyst job. What I think is really great about the CompTIA exams is how they're well regarded everywhere. They open a door. They open that first stage of, okay, this person not only has an interest, they've proven a level of knowledge that we've had independently verified, and then we get into the interview stage, where, as we've talked, there's so much more you need to do there. A lot of opportunity to really show who you are. But it's a crucial stepping stone for me on that journey into cybersecurity. So I don't know what your thoughts are on what the mentality behind building and improving that program that you have there, to help people with these pathways that they're looking at.
We want to show at CompTIA, we want to give people the opportunity to create what I call indicators of achievement. In the cybersecurity industry, we'll talk about indicators of compromise. Well, what's the indicator of compromise? Well, there was a file that was dropped and left behind, or there's something in memory, or there's the evidence that some sort of compromise happened. Well, from a learning perspective at CompTIA, we've always been very interested in providing people with evidence of their performance, of their achievement. That's why I like indicator of achievement. And you brought up the idea, we talked about pathway. I think it's really important for people to understand that as they go through their learning, certifications or some form of assessment can kind of take a snapshot of people's knowledge. And it gives people who are acting in good faith, who are acting honestly with each other, like, okay, I see that you got a certification. Does that give us a lingua franca, a common language? Does that give us the ability to communicate our experience and our indicators of achievement with each other? Here's my need as a hiring manager. Here is my indicator of achievement that might fill your need. There has to be some sort of common ground that's built. And I would argue that training, education, certification can build that if everybody's willing to work together and build a common frame of reference and in good faith. If you're very cynical about education or certification, then I don't know what to do about that, right? Because I have to say there are times where people are just like implicit in their dislike of training or dislike of certification. Sometimes, not all the times, is kind of this idea of, well, a great programmer or a great IT person is born, not made. And I think that's an odd, elitist, kind of unuseful perspective. But if you're willing to go, okay, in spite of various problems with how training works or certs work, in good faith, I can go, I can see that this is a useful way to start communication as to whether you're a good fit or not. It's a great way to do it. It's all about the dialogue,
Absolutely, yeah. It's not going to get you that position guaranteed. It never will, but it will get you
No.
that conversation, get you the foot in the door. Like you say, that common framework that shows that you got this, you got that level right now. That's helping me assess you, and now I can get into the pieces that really matter for the synergy of my team or whatever. And even SOCs that I've been a
Yeah.
part of are giving their analysts in roles already access to the CompTIA certifications, paying for them to do the certs. We talked about investing in your analysts in development. That I've seen common. So it's not just a cert to get you your first job. It's also a cert that people are doing um, in their professional careers as well, which I think is kind of testament to that this is valued by employers, not only to get you in the door, but also to kind of keep you moving forward. Um, and
I've been lucky enough. Yeah, I've been lucky enough to, when you said people who have some experience actually, and then they need to prove more experience or they get deeper into it. I was lucky enough to do a whole tour of the, I'll call it the APAC region. I went from India to Singapore to Thailand, and all throughout there, I was doing cybersecurity analytics. Kind of, we call them boot camp. It was very quick things. I could only be there for a day or two, each place. But we did that because they were experienced people. Some of them, I was learning stuff from them on some levels about how they were using Splunk, for example, or QRadar, which is, these are great tools. But it was interesting. Many of them actually didn't have as strong a foundation in things like DNS, network protocols, and things like that, how SSL is built up. And so they couldn't really tell the full narrative and use these tools to create executive dashboards or to identify pivot points and then automate them. And so with that foundational training that I was able to bring in about analytics and things, suddenly their performance went way higher. So it's a great point. Great point. That pathway is not just from beginner to advanced. That's not a things aren't that linear in learning or
yeah,
in the cybersecurity industry. If things were that linear, my gosh, we wouldn't have AI replace us. If things were that linear, a couple of web scripts would take care of it.
yeah,
I
It's
think
more it's more art.
overly.
Yeah, more art than
Yeah,
science is often it's a line, it's a cheesy line,
it's a
but
wonderful.
I do love that because it's that we're never gonna get replaced by AI because I've been part of training AI modules to do the job of it, and they are great at some pieces. If something can be automated, it should be, but there's still not that
Right.
nuance to kind of take the tangent, that bit of creativity. And one thing I've loved about this industry, right, is people who've been doing it for 40 years who have these grand titles of distinguished cybersecurity analysts because they had to make something up because of how long and how great they are at doing it, will come to you and say, "Hey, what do you think about this?" And initially, I thought he was quizzing me all the time. Actually, he wanted my opinion because he wanted to see what I thought about it, what my take of what my experience was with other tech and pieces. Because diversity of analysis, or kind of combining the diverse opinions when it comes to analysis, diverse knowledge, diverse interests,
Yeah.
is what
Mhm.
gives you that better outcome. Because attackers aren't linear either, as well, right? They are looking for any which way to evade you.
Oh,
It's the cat and mouse, and the mouse has always got the head start. So we need to get creative in order to find where it's
good analogy. I
squirreled
like
away
that.
the cheese
I
to
like that.
absolutely kill the metaphor there.
Well, and the idea that I think that we're all, talking around too is the idea of where can we have automation, which AI is automation that learns, but where can we use that in such a way, um, and that might eliminate jobs or radically alter jobs, but usually what that does, what some form of technology does, is it morphs a job. And so
Mm,
you have situations where, okay, I was talking to somebody, his name is Chris Cochran. He has worked as a threat hunter, which is kind of like a pen tester and a security analyst combined for Netflix, for example, for NSA. And he said, basically, what automation AI does is it does the boring stuff that I don't want to do so that I
yes.
could focus on the fun stuff, which is a subjective way of what I would call a new 80-20 rule. Let AI do the brute force work. And then that allows the human being to do what I call the last mile. And by the last mile, I'm talking about the unique. You mentioned, the unique lateral thought or the unique contribution that right now AI can't quite do. Supposedly, Ray Kurzweil, if you've heard that name, I'm not sure I'm saying his name right. He's been around for decades. He says by, I think, 2045, the singularity will happen, and I guess we'll all end up working
Oh yeah,
for
real
Arnold
AI, right?
Schwarzenegger.
That's
Yeah,
where it
right.
actually starts to train
You know,
itself and make its own decisions rather than just be following the module it's given, which
right.
seems crazy, but it's not real AI, right? I think that's the
No,
purest definition.
I think what's going to happen even then, though, is that machines will be used as coworkers. We have to figure out the space between where the AI coworker is and where we are, and that space, that you can call it a gap, you can call it an interstice, you can call it a play area, but that very human actually interaction area, where can we excel there? And if in that space, if you are here, that's in an area that's going to get automated, maybe you need to get those skills and hone those skills where it's unique. And this
Yeah.
is an analogy. I don't know if it works, but it's an American folklore thing about the story about John Henry. You'll have to Google it. I don't know if you've ever heard of it before,
Ford?
but he
Yeah.
huh?
Is he the
Not
owner
not
of
not
Ford?
Henry Ford, but
Oh,
no,
John.
no, John Henry, no, Henry Ford, but John Henry, African American person. Some people say actually existed. He was a person who used a pick, right, to go through and dig tunnels, as it were, right, railroad tunnels. And at that point, the steam drill was invented. So there was a
Mhm.
competition because this guy was incredibly powerful, right? Well, he won the competition. He beat the steam drill. Steam drill broke down a couple of times, but the problem
Okay.
was John Henry died at the end.
Oh,
Okay,
I
he
have heard
exhausted
this.
himself.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
So there's the story. Well, so it's a tragic story about a person's death at the hands of technology, right?
Mm.
Now think of this: a drill, oftentimes, first of all, the drill had to be fixed. But two, do you realize that when you're using a drill, even now, I don't care if it's drilling into metal or into rock or whatever, you actually have to do is a lateral movement to shake off the tailings off of the drill. Otherwise, the drill binds. Do you know what I'm trying to say? And it doesn't work
Mhm.
anymore.
Yeah.
And usually it takes a human being to physically get that and kind of shake the drill and then get it out there. So let AI do that repetitive work, and then that shaking of the drill, as it were, or that cleansing of it, that's the human input that still is necessary today. That's my analogy for understanding where to position yourself to negotiate with automation, to
Yeah.
negotiate with the inevitable, and identify your unique
And to put
contribution.
yourself in a
That's the
position of
critical
value
element.
alongside the AI, because there are still, I see vendors, I'm not going to name anyone, but I see them saying we've got this AI analyst, so now you can fire your analyst. Pretty much it's going to resolve things for you. And that it's been called snake oil by some people who've actually kind of tried it. I was actually going to hit you with an old UK kind of protest, the Luddites. I'm not sure if you're familiar, but I think it was around about the Industrial Revolution.
I love the
Yeah,
Luddites.
yeah.
Yeah. Very
That
cool. Yeah, they go
it
around
always
breaking stuff, right?
Exactly,
Yeah.
yeah. That always comes to mind when people talk about AI because for those who don't know, it was I think it was fabric textiles machines that were replacing the textiles
That's right.
workers. They were getting laid off in response to these machines who don't complain, work hard, etc. So they came in and smashed them all up. It's because they were taking their jobs. Well, the world's
Yep.
not unemployed now. It didn't happen quite the way they thought it might be. They completely take it. It shifted people's responsibilities or jobs elsewhere, and that's exactly what's going to happen again with the AI. We need to be able to kind of not coexist. It makes it sound like we've got to make room for them, but really harness them in the way that is most effective for us to make us more effective. And I kind of hope you're wrong, James, that in the 2045 or the Richard guy who is wrong, that we'll be working
Yeah,
alongside them as
yeah, yeah.
co-workers. Because I like Elon Musk's approach that we're going to be taking time off and enjoying a life of leisure while AI does everything for us. But that's just
No,
because
there's something to be said about that because why not, make that happen? The question becomes how, I would argue, how ethically will these technologies be used?
Mm,
In other words, if they're used in an unethical way to, simply conglomerate wealth among, very small groups of people, destructively, right? Versus a more, you can call it utopia like. Well, actually, it will free up people to be more thoughtful and to be more creative. That could work. I think as long as it morphs rather than destroys, I think everybody's for it. And so it really depends on an ethical element, but also in reality, human beings are pretty adaptive, right? They can be pretty adaptive. And
100%.
I would argue incredibly adaptive. The printing press, exponential technologies, Josh, exponential technologies are things that are developed very quickly and have an oversized impact on things. I would argue that's the two major elements of what, a car was that, a printing press was that, right? So do we have more and nuanced jobs or creative jobs since the printing press, since the car, right? And you can say, well, yeah, with the printing press, there weren't many people who wrote beautiful illuminated books anymore, right? Printing press eliminated that, but it sure created a whole lot of jobs.
Absolutely.
There weren't
And
many
hopefully,
blacksmiths after 1930, but
yeah, it does make things obsolete, but sometimes that can be good. And we've got a lot of problems in this world that we're looking to tackle. And almost use the example of technical debt. It's looking at existing systems and then trying to move them forward or improve them so that we can solve, let's say, climate change is the one that I was thinking of. But there's a great example of when, back when everyone used horses. And to get around, and there was a huge problem with manure all over the streets, and so they were trying to build contraptions or systems that would clean up all the manure.
Oh yeah,
it didn't work. And what did destroy it was the automobile. As soon as the automobile came, the problem of manure was resolved because there were no more horses around, kind of leaving that mess. And so hopefully we're on a cusp of an AI revolution similar to that can really take away some of the work, the problems we don't want to have to deal with anymore. But I totally hear your consideration.
Yeah, it makes you wonder what the exhaust will be. It makes you wonder what the exhaust will be. So we got rid of the manure problem, and then we ended up with smog, right? So we kind of kicked the can into a different area, right? So what happens as we move things into a more automated area, and it's easy to talk about the future and all that, but it sure would be interesting once we figure out, fusion maybe, or figure out the battery, and what that, the efficiencies that can bring, yeah, it could be fun.
Absolutely.
Technology is a wonderful thing. I love it. Yeah.
Yeah, we made some strides with fusion, so hopefully we're on the cusp of this new future. But James, or Dr. James, I want to thank you so much for your time today. It's been really great to talk to you about these various issues. We talked a lot about how to help with people trying to get into cybersecurity. We also talked about big problems of tomorrow, as well as I thought it was really helpful to look about the problems of the 90s and the 2000s and how security challenges have remained consistent, as well as when we dived into the more shiny new stuff
yeah, there's a lot of new challenges out there, and it really has to do, I think, with a lot with identity. Various ways to really understand how to protect identity. Now, that when people talk about zero trust or whatever, they're really focusing on this post perimeter. A lot of new metaphors having to do with contingency and context-oriented understandings of a situation rather than inside or outside. Anyway, sorry, it's always fun talking about this stuff.
This is no, I love it. Like, this is what you almost went into an episode 3 then, but maybe we'll have to reconvene for another, another date. So yeah, again, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate you coming on with your experience and your expertise and insight. CompTIA, as we said a few times today, great organization that offer a lot of affordable and great ways into computer technology related jobs, whether it's DevOps, cloud, or security, where we focus on. We have a partner with the CompTIA guys, hence why we got James on today, so we can actually help people get access to those exams, as well as if you join our school community, you can find some links in wherever you're watching this, or just type in Empirical Training School with a K. We can also help give you some support throughout that process, to make sure that you can really get the most out of it, and also build beyond that, define your pathway as we talked about, and the steps you need to take in order to get into cybersecurity, or just come and have fun. A lot of people are there just to kind of talk cybersecurity. So great. Thank you very much, James. Any last words from yourself on CompTIA, on yourself, on AI, big problems of the world?
Just keep on learning. I'm a big fan of just, you got to keep on keeping on. And the big thing, don't ever take away the gift of learning. and the gift of playing with tech from yourself or anyone else. So there's a final thought. Thanks so much, man, for your time.
No, great. I really enjoyed this. Thank you very much. And thank you for listening. This has been the Cyberspace Podcast by Empirical Training, and we'll catch you next week.
I think that might be it. I think that's a wrap.
Cyberspace Podcast.